Her laughter echoed in the empty apartment like a ghost. The scent of her perfume still clung to his sheets, but she was gone. Just like that. No warning, no goodbye, just the deafening silence of her absence. How does someone become your entire world, then vanish as if they never existed at all? If you've ever felt the crushing weight of heartbreak or wondered if you'll ever find your way back from loss, this story might just be the one you need to hear today. Hit that like button and subscribe to join our community of storytellers and dreamers, because sometimes the stories that break us open are the ones that ultimately help us heal. The first time Elijah saw Mia, he wasn't looking for love. In fact, he was actively avoiding it. At 28, he had built walls around his heart so high that even he sometimes forgot what it felt like to truly connect with someone. His small architectural firm was finally gaining traction after years of struggle, and romance was a complication he didn't need. His life had a comfortable rhythm: wake up, work, occasional drinks with friends, sleep, repeat. It wasn't exciting, but it was safe. And after watching his parents' toxic marriage implode during his childhood, safe was exactly what Elijah wanted. The coffee shop on the corner of Maple and Fifth had been his sanctuary for 3 years. Every Sunday morning, he claimed the same table by the window, spread out his sketchbook, and lost himself in designs while nursing an Americano. The baristas knew his order by heart. The regulars nodded in familiar recognition. It was predictable. Controlled. Until that rainy April morning when she walked in. Mia entered the coffee shop like a burst of color in a black and white film. Her dark curls were damp from the rain, her yellow raincoat splattered with droplets that caught the light. She laughed as she shook water from her umbrella, apologizing to anyone who got sprinkled in the process. Her voice carried across the room, warm, slightly husky, alive. Elijah tried not to stare, but found himself watching as she ordered, chatted with the barista, and then looked around for a seat. The coffee shop was unusually crowded that day, every table occupied except for the empty chair across from him. Their eyes met. She raised an eyebrow in question. He nodded before he could think better of it. "Mind if I join you?" she asked, already pulling out the chair. "I promise I don't bite." "Well, not before my first coffee, anyway." "Be my guest," he said, hastily moving his sketches to make room. She settled across from him, cradling her mug between slender hands adorned with silver rings. "I'm Mia, by the way." "Elijah." "Are you an artist?" she asked, nodding toward his sketchbook. "Architect." "Ah, so you build dreams." He almost corrected her. He designed functional spaces, not dreams, but something in her expression stopped him. She was looking at his sketches with genuine interest, head tilted slightly, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "I suppose I do," he heard himself say instead. That was the beginning. Mia wasn't like anyone Elijah had ever met. She taught literature at the local community college and wrote poetry in her spare time. Where he was methodical, she was spontaneous. Where he planned, she improvised. Where he hesitated, she leapt. Their coffee shop encounter turned into dinner the following weekend. Dinner became a hike the next Saturday. The hike led to a day trip to the coast. Each meeting, Elijah told himself, would be the last. He didn't have time for distractions, didn't want complications. Yet he found himself saying yes every time she called. "What are you so afraid of?" she asked him one evening, 3 months after they'd met. They were sitting on his balcony, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. Her head rested against his shoulder, her hair smelling of jasmine and something uniquely her. "I'm not afraid," he said automatically. She laughed softly. "Elijah, you plan your grocery shopping a week in advance. You have backup plans for your backup plans. You check the weather forecast every morning even though you work indoors. That's just being prepared. That's building a fortress." She turned to face him, her eyes serious now. "What happened to make you so careful? No one had ever asked him that question so directly. He found himself telling her about his childhood, about a father whose love was conditional on perfection, about a mother who stayed too long in a marriage that had died years before, about the night he'd found her crying in the kitchen and promised himself he would never be the cause of someone's tears. Mia listened without interrupting. When he finished, she took his hand and pressed it against her heart. "Feel that?" she asked. "Hearts are stronger than you think. They're meant to be risked." That night, he kissed her for the first time. It felt like stepping off a cliff and discovering he could fly. Summer melted into fall, and Elijah found himself doing things he never would have imagined. He called in sick to work to drive 3 hours to a poetry reading Mia was giving. He learned to cook Thai food because she mentioned missing the flavors from her semester abroad. He started keeping a journal, filling it with thoughts and observations he wanted to share with her. His friends noticed the change in him. "You're different," his business partner, James, commented one day over lunch. "Happier. Less uptight." "I'm the same," Elijah protested. James snorted. "Last year, you nearly had a breakdown when a client wanted to change the window placement after we'd finalized the plans. Yesterday, when the Henderson project got pushed back 2 months, you just shrugged and said we'd figure it out." Elijah couldn't argue with that. Mia was changing him, or perhaps she was simply helping him remember parts of himself he'd buried long ago, the parts that knew how to laugh freely, to find joy in unexpected moments, to embrace uncertainty as part of life's beauty. On their 6-month anniversary, Elijah took Mia to the rooftop garden of a building he'd designed. He'd arranged for a small table to be set up, complete with candles and her favorite flowers. As they ate dinner under the stars, he realized with startling clarity that he was in love with her. The thought should have terrified him. Instead, it felt like coming home. "What are you thinking about?" Mia asked, noticing his silence. "You," he said simply. "Us." She smiled, reaching across the table to touch his face. "Us is my favorite thing to think about." Later that night, tangled in his sheets, her head on his chest, he whispered, "I love you." The words felt both monumental and entirely natural, like they'd been waiting inside him all along. She propped herself up on one elbow, her eyes shining in the dim light. "I love you too, Elijah. More than I thought possible." He believed her. That was his first mistake. Winter arrived with unexpected harshness that year. Record snowfalls blanketed the city, transforming it into a postcard-perfect wonderland that quickly became a nightmare of delayed projects and logistical challenges for Elijah's firm. He found himself working longer hours, coming home exhausted to find Mia grading papers or working on her poetry manuscript. They were both busy, but they made time for each other. Weekend mornings were sacred, no phones, no work, just the two of them making breakfast together, reading the newspaper, talking about everything and nothing. Elijah had never known such contentment. But as January turned to February, he began to notice subtle changes in Mia. She seemed distracted, checking her phone more often, disappearing for long walks alone. When he asked if everything was okay, she would smile and say, "Just winter blues," or "deadline stress." He believed her because he wanted to. That was his second mistake. On Valentine's Day, he planned a special evening, reservations at her favorite restaurant, tickets to a play she'd been wanting to see, a small velvet box burning a hole in his pocket. Not an engagement ring, they weren't there yet, but a promise ring, a symbol of what they were building together. Mia was quiet throughout dinner, picking at her food, her laughter not quite reaching her eyes. During the play, he caught her checking her phone twice. By the time they returned to his apartment, the box remained in his pocket, his carefully rehearsed words unspoken. "What's going on, Mia?" he finally asked as they sat on his couch, the silence between them heavier than it had ever been. She looked at him then, really looked at him, and he saw something in her eyes that made his stomach drop, a mixture of sadness and resolve that he recognized from his mother's face the day she finally left his father. I got offered a position, she said quietly. A teaching fellowship. In London. London, he repeated, the word feeling foreign on his tongue. For how long? 2 years. Maybe more if it goes well. 2 years. An ocean between them. The carefully constructed future he'd been imagining crumbled like sand. When would you leave? He asked, already knowing the answer wouldn't be one he wanted to hear. March 15th. Less than a month away. She'd known about this for weeks, he realized. While he'd been planning their Valentine's celebration, she'd been planning her departure. Were you going to tell me? The hurt in his voice surprised even him. I'm telling you now, she said, reaching for his hand. I've been trying to find the right moment. And what about us? Is there an us in this plan of yours? She hesitated, just for a moment, but it was enough. Elijah, you know how much I care about you. Don't, he interrupted, pulling his hand away. Don't say you care about me while you're breaking my heart. I'm not breaking up with you, she insisted. I'm asking for space to pursue something I've dreamed about since graduate school. We could try long distance. People make it work all the time. But Elijah heard what she wasn't saying, that she'd made this decision without him, that her dreams didn't include him, at least not as an essential part. That when faced with a choice between staying with him and pursuing her ambitions, she hadn't even hesitated. You should go, he said finally, his voice flat. It's a great opportunity. Elijah. I mean it. You should go. He stood up, needing physical distance between them. I just need some time to process this. She left that night, promising to call the next day. He didn't sleep, instead sitting on his balcony until dawn, watching the city lights blur through unshed tears. The next 3 weeks passed in a strange limbo. On the surface, they tried to maintain normalcy, dinners, movies, conversations about their days. But underneath ran currents of unspoken words and growing distance. Elijah threw himself into work, taking on new projects, staying late at the office. Mia packed her apartment bit by bit, each box a reminder of the impending separation. They didn't talk about the future. Elijah couldn't bring himself to ask if she wanted him to wait for her, and Mia never volunteered the information. Instead, they lived in a painful present, both aware that each moment together was numbered. The night before her flight, they had dinner at her nearly empty apartment, sitting cross-legged on the floor with takeout containers between them. The conversation was stilted, full of awkward pauses and careful avoidance of anything meaningful. I'll call when I land, she said as he prepared to leave. And we can video chat on weekends. He nodded, not trusting himself to speak. She walked him to the door, and they stood there, the threshold between them suddenly symbolic. Elijah, she began, her voice breaking slightly. I never meant to hurt you. I know, he said, and he did. Mia wasn't cruel, she was just following her heart, which had led her away from him. He couldn't hate her for that, even as it tore him apart. He kissed her one last time, trying to memorize the feel of her lips, the scent of her skin, the way her body fit against his. Then he walked away, not looking back, knowing if he did, he might beg her to stay. The next morning, he didn't go to the airport. They had agreed it would be easier this way, a clean break, no tearful goodbyes in a crowded terminal. At 10:15 a.m., when her flight was scheduled to depart, he was in a client meeting, discussing the structural integrity of a new community center. Only James noticed when he stopped mid-sentence, his eyes fixed on the clock on the wall. She was gone. The first month without Mia was the hardest. True to her word, she called when she landed, and they attempted video chats on weekends. But the 8-hour time difference made coordination difficult, and their conversations felt forced, filled with superficial updates and awkward silences. Elijah found himself both dreading and longing for these calls. Each one was a reminder of what he'd lost, yet he couldn't bring himself to end them completely. He clung to the connection, even as it grew more tenuous with each passing week. London seemed to energize Mia. Her face glowed through the screen as she described her classes, her new colleagues, the literary scene she was immersing herself in. She was thriving, blooming in ways she never had in their small city. Elijah tried to be happy for her, but each enthusiastic story felt like another nail in the coffin of their relationship. 6 weeks after she left, their scheduled call never came. He waited by his computer for 2 hours before sending a text. Her response came the next morning, an apology, an explanation about a departmental dinner that had run late, a promise to make it up to him. But the missed call became a pattern. Once, then twice, then often enough that it was no longer surprising. Their texts grew shorter, less frequent. The intimacy they had shared evaporated like morning dew under the harsh sun of distance and diverging lives. 3 months after Mia's departure, Elijah received a text that simply read, "Can we talk tonight?" He knew before the call what she was going to say. He answered anyway, masochistically needing to hear the words. "I've met someone," she said, her voice small but steady. "A fellow professor in the English department. It wasn't planned, Elijah. It just happened." "How long?" he asked, surprised by the calmness in his voice when he felt anything but calm inside. "A few weeks. I wanted to be sure before I told you." "Sure." The word echoed in his mind. Sure about ending things with him. Sure about this new man. Sure in a way she had never been about their relationship. "Are you happy?" he asked, the question escaping before he could stop it. A pause. "Yes," she admitted. "I am." He closed his eyes, absorbing the pain of her honesty. "Then I'm glad for you, Mia. I never meant for this to happen," she said, a hint of tears in her voice. "You have to believe that." "I do," he said, and it was true. Mia hadn't left to find someone else, she had left to find herself. This new relationship was just a consequence of that journey, not its purpose. They said goodbye with promises to stay in touch that both knew were empty. After hanging up, Elijah sat in the dark of his apartment, feeling a strange mixture of grief and relief. The uncertainty was over. The waiting had ended. Now he could begin the process of truly letting go. Summer returned to the city, bringing with it memories of the previous year, of meeting Mia, of falling in love, of believing in possibilities he had never considered before. Elijah found himself avoiding the coffee shop where they'd first met, taking different routes to work to bypass places they'd frequented together. His friends tried to help in their well-meaning ways. James set him up on blind dates that were uniformly disastrous. His sister, Naomi, invited him to dinner parties populated with eligible women who looked at him with pitying eyes when they learned he was recently single. Elijah went through the motions, showing up to social events, making appropriate conversation, even occasionally agreeing to a first date. But his heart wasn't in it. He felt like an actor playing the role of a functional adult while inside, he was still stuck in that moment of realization that Mia was truly gone. The turning point came unexpectedly, on a Tuesday afternoon in July. A new client had requested a meeting at, of all places, the coffee shop on Maple and Fifth. Elijah considered rescheduling, suggesting a different location, but something stopped him. Perhaps it was time to face this particular ghost. He arrived early, steeling himself as he pushed open the familiar door. The scent of freshly ground coffee beans hit him first, followed by the low hum of conversation and the hiss of the espresso machine. He scanned the room automatically, half expecting to see a yellow raincoat and dark curls, but of course, she wasn't there. What he did see was his old table by the window, their table, currently occupied by a young woman surrounded by textbooks and a laptop. "She Luke."